November 27, 1950. 2200 hours. Yudam-ni, North Korea. Temperature, minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Private First Class James Ransom, 19 years old from Akron, Ohio, huddled in his fighting hole on the perimeter of the Marine position. The cold was beyond anything he'd experienced. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous, lethal, a presence as threatening as any enemy. His breath froze in the air. His hands were numb despite gloves. His feet had lost feeling hours ago. The M1 Garand rifle beside him was coated in ice. Around the perimeter, 7,000 Marines of the 5th and 7th Marine Regiments dug into frozen ground. They'd arrived at Yudam-ni 2 days earlier, part of the 1st Marine Division's advance toward the Yalu River and the Chinese border. The mission was to push north, destroy remaining North Korean forces, end the war by Christmas. Intelligence reported minimal Chinese involvement, perhaps a few scattered volunteers, nothing organized, nothing threatening. Intelligence was catastrophically wrong. At 2,200 hours, the night erupted. Bugles sounded from the surrounding hills. High, piercing notes that cut through the frozen air. Then whistles, cymbals, drums. Then screaming, thousands of voices shouting in Chinese, creating cacophony designed to terrify and disorient. Then muzzle flashes from every direction as Chinese troops emerged from concealment and charged the Marine positions. Ransom grabbed his rifle. The bolt was frozen. He worked it frantically, breaking ice, chambering around. Around him, Marines were having the same problem. Weapons that functioned perfectly in temperate climates seized in extreme cold. Oil froze. Metal contracted. Mechanisms failed. Some rifles fired. Others didn't. Machine guns jammed after few rounds. The Chinese came in waves. Hundreds, then thousands of soldiers in quilted uniforms charging through the darkness. They had numerical superiority, surprise, and the advantage of having acclimated to the cold. The Marines had firepower, training, and determination. The battle was joined at point-blank range. Ransom fired at shapes in the darkness. Chinese troops fell. Others kept coming. The fighting was desperate and chaotic. Hand grenades exploded. Bayonets clashed. Men fought with entrenching tools and rifle butts when weapons failed. The Marine perimeter held, barely, through sheer determination and training that didn't allow for panic even when surrounded. By dawn on November 28th, the situation was clear and terrifying. The 1st Marine Division, approximately 30,000 Marines and attached Army units, was surrounded by the Chinese 9th Army Group, approximately 120,000 troops. The Marines were isolated 78 miles inland from the port of Hungnam, connected to the coast by a single mountain road that wound through valleys and overpasses. That road was now cut in multiple places by Chinese forces. The temperature was minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Supplies were limited. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Ammunition was finite. The Marines were outnumbered 4-1, trapped in hostile terrain, facing enemy who demonstrated willingness to accept catastrophic casualties to achieve objectives. This is the story of the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, of the 17 days that tested the 1st Marine Division beyond any previous limits, of the fighting withdrawal through 78 miles of Chinese divisions in temperatures reaching minus 40 degrees, of General Oliver Smith who refused to call it retreat and declared, "We're just attacking in a different direction," of the 13 medals of honor earned in the frozen hell, of the Tootsie rolls that saved lives and a bridge that was airdropped in pieces and assembled under fire, and of how 30,000 surrounded Marines brought out their dead, their wounded, their equipment, and even Korean refugees while destroying 7 Chinese divisions in the process. The Chinese 9th Army Group had entered North Korea in secret throughout November 1950, moving at night, hiding during day, maintaining radio silence. Approximately 120,000 troops infiltrated the mountains around Chosin Reservoir undetected by American intelligence. The 9th Army Group commander was General Song Shirluan, experienced officer who'd fought in the Chinese Civil War. Song's orders from Mao Zedong were explicit: destroy the American forces at Chosin, particularly the 1st Marine Division. The Chinese High Command wanted decisive victory that would demonstrate China's military capabilities and force Americans to negotiate rather than continue advancing toward Chinese border. Song planned a classic encirclement: allow American forces to advance deep into mountains, cut their supply lines, attack simultaneously from all directions, use numerical superiority and night attacks to overwhelm defenders. The Americans, isolated and surrounded, would be destroyed or forced to surrender. The plan was sound. The execution would prove more difficult than anticipated. The Chinese 9th Army Group consisted of the 20th, 26th, and 27th Armies, 12 divisions total. These were veteran troops who'd fought Japanese in World War II and nationalist forces in Chinese Civil War. They were tough, disciplined, and ideologically committed, but they were also poorly equipped for a Korean winter. The Chinese troops wore quilted cotton uniforms adequate for southern China, but insufficient for North Korean mountains in November. They had minimal cold weather gear. Many soldiers wore canvas shoes. Frostbite was widespread even before fighting began. The Chinese logistics were primitive compared to American standards. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles through mountains. Food was limited. Soldiers carried several days' rations of rice and relied on foraging or captured supplies. Ammunition was finite. Soldiers were instructed to fire only when certain of hitting target. Medical support was minimal. Wounded often received no treatment beyond basic first aid. But the Chinese had advantages. They knew the terrain. They were acclimated to cold better than Americans who'd been in temperate zones weeks earlier. They had numerical superiority, 120,000 Chinese versus 30,000 Marines and attached units. They had tactical surprise. The Marines didn't know they were surrounded until Chinese attacked. And they had willingness to accept casualties that American commanders found incomprehensible. Chinese doctrine emphasized overwhelming attacks regardless of losses. Human wave tactics accepted that first waves would be decimated but would exhaust enemy ammunition and reveal defensive positions for subsequent waves to exploit. The Chinese plan called for simultaneous attacks on November 27th to 28th against all Marine positions. Yudam-ni, where 5th and 7th Marines were concentrated, would be attacked by 3 Chinese divisions. Hagaru-ri, division headquarters and supply base, will be attacked by 2 divisions. Hagaru-ri, further south, will be attacked by 1 division. The road between these positions would be cut at multiple points. The Marines would be isolated in separate pockets, unable to support each other, vulnerable to defeat in detail. The attacks on November 27th achieved surprise and inflicted casualties but didn't break Marine defenses. The Chinese discovered that Marines were more resilient than anticipated. American firepower, artillery, mortars, automatic weapons, was devastating against mass attacks. American air support, once daylight allowed it, was lethal, and American defensive doctrine emphasized holding positions regardless of odds, refusing to break even when surrounded. By November 28th, Song realized his encirclement had trapped Marine Division but hadn't destroyed it. The Marines held defensive perimeters at Yudam-ni, Hagaru-ri, and Hagaru-ri. They were isolated and surrounded but combat effective and determined. What Song had planned as quick victory would become protracted battle that would destroy his army group. The extreme cold at Chosin Reservoir was as deadly as Chinese attacks. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold that killed exposed flesh in minutes, that made metal brittle and weapons unreliable, that transformed routine activities into life-threatening challenges. Frostbite was epidemic. Marines who'd served in Pacific Islands during World War II had never experienced cold approaching this severity. Hands froze inside gloves. Feet froze inside boots. Faces froze despite scarves and helmet liners. Severe frostbite required amputation. Fingers, toes, sometimes entire feet or hands. Medical personnel couldn't keep up with frostbite casualties in addition to combat wounds. Weapons malfunctioned constantly. M1 Garand rifles froze. Bolts wouldn't cycle, firing pins broke, magazines jammed. Machine guns seized after short bursts. The M1 carbines issued to officers and specialist personnel were particularly unreliable and cold. Extraction failures left Marines with single-shot weapons or clubs. Mortars froze. Artillery pieces required constant maintenance to remain functional. Even hand grenades were unreliable. Some didn't explode because cold affected fuses. Vehicles failed. Trucks wouldn't start. Batteries died in cold. Radiators froze despite antifreeze. Differentials seized. The Marines improvised, running engines constantly to prevent freezing, using fires underneath vehicles to warm engines, pushing vehicles that wouldn't start. But vehicle losses mounted. Disabled vehicles had to be destroyed to prevent capture rather than being recovered. Medical supplies froze. Morphine froze solid in syrettes. Corpsmen couldn't inject pain medication into wounded. They resorted to carrying syrettes inside their uniforms next to body heat. But even that often wasn't enough. Blood plasma froze. Intravenous fluids froze. Medical personnel struggled to treat casualties with supplies that didn't function. Food froze. C rations became solid blocks that couldn't be eaten without thawing. Water froze in canteens. Marines had to break ice to drink. Some melted snow for water, risking dehydration from the energy required to melt and warm it. Hot meals were impossible on the perimeter. Fires revealed positions to Chinese. Marines survived on whatever food they could thaw or eat frozen. The extreme cold affected Chinese forces even more severely than Marines. Chinese troops wore lighter uniforms and had less cold weather equipment. Chinese frostbite casualties exceeded combat casualties in some units. Some Chinese soldiers froze to death in their positions. Others were so debilitated by cold that they couldn't fight effectively. Chinese weapons, often older designs, were even more vulnerable to freezing than American weapons. But cold affected both sides, an added dimension of suffering beyond normal combat. Men fought while barely able to feel their hands. They slept in holes dug in frozen ground that provided minimal protection from wind. They performed tasks, changing magazines, treating wounded, moving supplies. That would be simple in normal conditions but became ordeals in minus 40-degree cold. The psychological impact of extreme cold compounded combat stress. Marines knew that being wounded meant additional risk of freezing. They knew that if positions were overrun and they had to retreat, stragglers would freeze. They knew that Chinese weren't only enemy. The environment itself was trying to kill them. This knowledge affected decisions and morale in ways that commanders had to address constantly. Major General Oliver Prince Smith commanded the 1st Marine Division. Smith was 57 years old, a career Marine who'd served in World War I, participated in various campaigns in World War II, and had reputation as cautious, methodical commander who prioritized Marines' welfare. Smith had been skeptical of the advance to Chosin from the beginning. The extended supply line, the exposed flanks, the mountainous terrain, the approaching winter, all suggested operational risks that weren't being adequately addressed by higher headquarters. Smith had argued for consolidating positions rather than continuing north. His concerns had been overruled by Major General Edward Almond, ex-Corps commander, who wanted aggressive advance to the Yalu River. When Chinese attacked on November 27th, Smith's cautious preparation proved prescient. He'd insisted on establishing supply bases at Hagaru-ri and Hagaru-ri despite pressure to advance faster. He'd stockpiled supplies and ammunition at these bases. He'd built an airstrip at Hagaru-ri, bulldozing frozen ground to create runway that could handle C-47 transport aircraft. These decisions, made over Almond's objections, would save the division. Smith's first assessment after Chinese attack was clear. The division was surrounded and outnumbered but not defeated. The Marines held defensive positions. They had supplies for limited time. They had air support when weather allowed. They had cohesion and morale. What they needed was unified command, clear mission, and determination to fight through to the coast. Smith issued orders on November 28th. The 5th and 7th Marines at Yudam-ni would fight their way south to Hagaru-ri, breaking through Chinese forces cutting the road. Once consolidated at Hagaru-ri, the entire division would continue south to Koto-ri, then to the coast at Hungnam. This would be fighting withdrawal, not retreat, but tactical movement while maintaining contact with enemy. Every position would be defended until the division was ready to withdraw. No equipment would be abandoned. No casualties would be left behind. Wounded would be evacuated. Dead would be brought out. When war correspondents asked Smith about retreating from Chosin, Smith gave a response that became legendary. Retreat? Hell! We're not retreating. We're just advancing in a different direction. The quote, whether precisely accurate or embellished, captured Smith's mindset and became a defining statement of Chosin. The Marines weren't defeated and running. They were conducting tactical movement while destroying Chinese forces that got in their way. Smith's leadership during the 17 days from November 27th to December 13th demonstrated how commanders' decisions affect unit performance under impossible conditions. Smith remained calm throughout crisis. He visited units, talked to Marines, assessed situations personally rather than relying solely on reports. He made decisions based on tactical necessity rather than external pressure. When Almond visited and suggested Marines abandon equipment and wounded to move faster, Smith refused. The Marines would bring everything and everyone out. Smith coordinated air support, requested supplies, managed evacuation of wounded, positioned units for maximum effectiveness. He balanced competing demands, defending current positions while preparing to move, maintaining offensive capability while conducting withdrawal, preserving combat power while inflicting maximum casualties on Chinese. His tactical skill and determination kept division functioning as cohesive unit rather than disintegrating into scattered groups focused solely on escape. The relationship between Smith and Almond was tense throughout operation. Almond wanted rapid movement and aggressive attacks. Smith wanted methodical movement and preparation. Almond criticized Marines for moving too slowly. Smith pointed out that hasty movement would mean abandoning casualties and equipment. The tension reflected different command philosophies and would affect post-battle assessments. The 5th and 7th Marines at Yudam-ni, approximately 7,000 men, faced the most difficult situation of any Marine unit. They were furthest inland, surrounded by 3 Chinese divisions, cut off from the rest of 1st Marine Division by Chinese forces holding the road south. The Chinese attacks on November 27 to 28 came from all directions simultaneously. The Marines defended perimeter through night attacks and continued fighting through subsequent days. The defensive fighting was brutal and continuous. Chinese attacks came in waves. Initial assault would be repulsed with heavy casualties. Then another wave would attack different sector, then another. The Chinese were attempting to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. Marine defensive fire was devastating. Artillery fired constantly at maximum rates. Mortars dropped rounds on attacking Chinese formations. Machine guns fired until barrels glowed. Riflemen shot until ammunition ran low, then were resupplied and continued firing. The frozen ground was piled with Chinese dead. Some estimates suggest Chinese casualties in attacks on Yudam-ni exceeded 10,000 in the first 3 days. But Marine casualties mounted. Companies were reduced to platoon strength. Platoons were reduced to squads. The wounded overwhelmed medical facilities. Ammunition expenditure exceeded resupply rates. Food was running low. The cold continued inflicting frostbite casualties. The situation was unsustainable. Yudam-ni couldn't be held indefinitely. Smith ordered the 5th and 7th Marines to break out south to Hagaru-ri. This would require abandoning Yudam-ni positions, fighting through Chinese forces on the road, and moving 14 miles of mountain passes while engaged with enemy. The breakout began December 1st. The withdrawal from Yudam-ni was a masterpiece of small unit tactics under impossible conditions. Rear guard units held positions while main body began moving. When rear guard withdrew, other units provided covering fire. Chinese attacked continuously, trying to cut the column, isolate units, create chaos. Marines fought through every attack, maintained column integrity, kept moving. The 14 miles from Yudam-ni to Hagaru-ri took 3 days. Every mile was contested. Chinese held high ground along route and fired down on column. Marines had to clear hills of Chinese before continuing. This meant deploying units off-road, attacking uphill in snow and ice, clearing positions, then continuing march. The casualties mounted with each engagement. The cold made everything worse. Wounded couldn't be treated adequately while moving. Frostbite casualties increased with exposure. Weapons continued malfunctioning. Vehicles broke down and had to be destroyed. Food and water remained frozen. Marines fought while exhausted, frozen, hungry, thirsty. December 3rd, the lead elements of 5th and 7th Marines reached Hagaru-ri. They'd fought through 3 Chinese divisions, inflicted thousands of casualties, and brought out their wounded and most of their equipment. The cost was severe. The 2 regiments had suffered nearly 1,500 casualties. But they'd accomplished what Chinese commanders thought impossible. They'd broken through encirclement while maintaining cohesion and combat effectiveness. Hagaru-ri at the southern tip of Chosin Reservoir was division headquarters and critical logistics base. Approximately 3,000 Marines and attached Army units defended the perimeter. More importantly, Hagaru-ri contained the airstrip that General Smith had insisted on constructing despite objections. The airstrip at Hagaru-ri was engineering miracle, built in frozen ground with minimal equipment. The 2,900-foot runway could accommodate C-47 transport aircraft. Beginning November 28th, C-47s began landing at Hagaru-ri despite Chinese fire and dangerous conditions. The aircraft brought supplies, ammunition, medical supplies, food. More critically, they evacuated wounded. By December 6th, when division withdrew from Hagaru-ri, over 4,300 casualties had been evacuated by air. The importance of Hagaru-ri airstrip cannot be overstated. Without it, wounded would have had to be carried or transported by vehicle through an entire withdrawal route while exposed to fire and cold. Many wouldn't have survived. The airstrip allowed critical casualties to be evacuated within hours of being wounded rather than days. It provided psychological boost to Marines who knew that being wounded didn't mean death from cold or Chinese attacks. Smith's insistence on building airstrip despite pressure to advance faster saved thousands of lives. But Hagaru-ri perimeter had to be defended while airstrip operated. Chinese attacked repeatedly, trying to overrun positions or destroy runway. The fighting around Hagaru-ri was as intense as Yudam-ni. Chinese 58th and 59th Divisions attacked from multiple directions. East Hill overlooking Hagaru-ri changed hands multiple times as Chinese attacked and Marines counterattacked to retake it. One of the critical actions of Hagaru-ri involved a composite unit defending East Hill on November 28th to 29th. The unit included Army soldiers, Marine engineers, and headquarters personnel, everyone who could be spared from other duties. The Chinese attacked in overwhelming numbers. The defenders held through night of continuous attacks, calling artillery fire on their own positions when Chinese overran sections of line. By dawn, the position held despite catastrophic casualties. The defense of East Hill ensured Hagaru-ri perimeter remained intact. When 5th and 7th Marines arrived from Yudam-ni on December 3rd to 4th, division was concentrated at Hagaru-ri for first time since Chinese attacks began. Smith now had approximately 14,000 combat effectives, several thousand wounded awaiting evacuation, and substantial supplies. The next phase was continuing withdrawal to Hagaru-ri, 11 miles south, then to the coast. December 6th, division began withdrawing from Hagaru-ri. The wounded who couldn't be evacuated by air were loaded on trucks and ambulances. Supplies that couldn't be carried were destroyed. The Marines formed road column and began moving south, knowing Chinese would attack throughout route. The road from Hagaru-ri to Hagaru-ri and then to the coast was single-lane mountain road that wound through valleys and overpasses. The road was cut in multiple places where Chinese had destroyed bridges or created roadblocks. The terrain favored defenders. Chinese held high ground overlooking road and could fire down on column. The fighting withdrawal required different tactics than static defense. The column had to keep moving while engaged. Units would deploy off-road, attack Chinese positions on high ground, clear them, return to column, and continue. The process repeated every few miles. Artillery and air support suppressed some Chinese positions, but couldn't eliminate all threats. December 6th to 8th, division moved from Hagaru-ri to Hagaru-ri. Every mile was contested. Chinese attacked at numerous points, trying to cut column, isolate units, create chaos. Marines fought through every attack. Tank infantry teams led column and broke through roadblocks. Engineers repaired bridges under fire. Artillery displaced by bounds, stopping the fire support missions and moving catch-up with column. The casualties continued mounting. Wounded from each engagement were added to convoy. Medical personnel treated casualties in moving vehicles or during brief halts. The cold made medical treatment extraordinarily difficult. Plasma couldn't be administered. Morphine was often frozen. Surgical procedures were impossible, except at Hagaru-ri, where aid station had some warming capability. December 8th, lead elements reached Hagaru-ri. The division was now 11 miles from Hungnam, but faced most difficult obstacle, Funchilin Pass. Funchilin Pass was mountain pass where road descended from plateau toward coast. The road crossed several ravines on bridges. Chinese had destroyed critical bridge at the steepest section of pass. The gap was impassable. Vehicles couldn't ford ravine, and without vehicles the Marines would have to abandon wounded and equipment. Engineers assessed situation. The bridge could be replaced with temporary span if materials were available. But bridge sections capable of supporting tanks and loaded trucks didn't exist at Hagaru-ri. They would have to be airdropped. December 7th, Air Force 119 flying boxcars airdropped bridge sections at Hagaru-ri. These were treadway bridge sections, portable steel spans designed for temporary bridging. Each section weighed several tons. The airdrop had to be precise. If sections landed off target in Chinese-controlled areas, mission would fail. The airdrop was successful. 8 bridge sections were dropped. 6 survived landing intact. Engineers loaded sections on trucks and moved to Funchilin Pass with advance units that fought to clear Chinese from vicinity. December 9th, engineers began installing bridge while under sporadic fire. The work was dangerous and difficult. Sections had to be maneuvered into position over gap, secured, and decked with planking to create roadway. The temperature was minus 30 degrees. The engineers worked exposed on cliff face while Marines provided security. By afternoon, December 9th, bridge was complete. Tanks tested span. It held. The division could continue withdrawal. The bridge at Funchilin Pass became an iconic moment of Chosin, engineering resourcefulness and courage under fire that overcame obstacle Chinese thought impassable. 13 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions at Chosin Reservoir, second highest number for any single campaign in American military history. The medals represented spectrum of heroism displayed throughout battle. Captain William Barber commanded Fox Company, 7th Marines, which defended Toktong Pass, mountain pass on road between Yudam-ni and Hagaru-ri. Fox Company's mission was to hold pass and keep road open for withdrawal of 5th and 7th Marines. Beginning November 28th, Fox Company, approximately 240 Marines, defended against Chinese regiment, approximately 2,000 troops. The fighting was continuous for 5 days and nights. Chinese attacked repeatedly. Fox Company held despite being outnumbered nearly 10-1, despite mounting casualties, despite cold. Barber was wounded multiple times but refused evacuation and continued commanding from stretcher. When 5th and 7th Marines withdrew through Toktong Pass December 2nd to 3rd, Fox Company was still holding. Barber received Medal of Honor. Fox Company's stand was critical to successful withdrawal. If Chinese had cut road at Toktong Pass, 5th and 7th Marines would have been trapped. Staff Sergeant Archie Van Winkle, Machine Gun Platoon Sergeant, defended position at Hagaru-ri on November 28th to 29th. When Chinese overran section perimeter, Van Winkle counterattacked alone with pistol and grenades, killing several Chinese and disrupting attack. He then returned to machine gun position and fired until ammunition exhausted. When position was surrounded, Van Winkle fought hand-to-hand until reinforcements arrived. His actions prevented breakthrough that could have resulted in loss of Hagaru-ri. Van Winkle received Medal of Honor. Private First Class William Baugh, rifleman with 5th Marines, assaulted Chinese positions single-handedly on December 2nd during withdrawal from Yudam-ni. The position was blocking road with machine gun fire. Baugh charged position through heavy fire, through grenades, and engaged Chinese with rifle at close range. He was killed clearing position, but his actions allowed column to continue. Baugh received posthumous Medal of Honor. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis commanded 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, which conducted remarkable action during withdrawal from Yudam-ni. On December 1st to 2nd, Davis led his battalion through Chinese-held territory on mission to relieve Fox Company at Toktong Pass. The route was through mountains off-road through uncharted terrain at night in sub-zero temperatures. Davis navigated by compass, leading battalion through Chinese positions, fighting when discovered, pushing through to objective. The battalion reached Fox Company, relieved them, and secured Toktong Pass, allowing withdrawal of 5th and 7th Marines. Davis received Medal of Honor for leadership and tactical brilliance. The 13 Medals of Honor reflected extraordinary courage displayed by hundreds of Marines. Every medal represented a moment where individual or small group faced impossible odds and prevailed through determination and sacrifice. The concentrated heroism at Chosin, 13 medals in 17 days, demonstrated how extreme conditions brought out both best and worst in human nature. The worst was the suffering and death. The best was courage that refused to accept defeat. One of the enduring legends of Chosin involves Tootsie rolls. The story, repeated in various forms, claims that Marines at Yudam-ni requested airdrop of mortar shells using code name Tootsie rolls. Supply personnel misunderstood and airdropped actual Tootsie roll candy instead of ammunition. The Marines, facing desperate situation, discovered that Tootsie rolls provided calories and warmth and possibly saved lives. The reality is more complex, but the core truth remains. Tootsie rolls did play a role at Chosin. Marines received candy and supply drops, including Tootsie rolls. The candy provided quick calories when other food was frozen. Marines discovered that Tootsie rolls could be warmed in mouths or hands and eaten for energy. The candy was compact, didn't freeze solid like chocolate, and provided boosts when Marines were exhausted and hungry. More importantly, Tootsie rolls were used for field expedient repairs. The candy could be warmed, shaped, and used to patch holes in fuel lines, radiators, and other equipment. When it refroze, it created temporary seal that kept vehicles and equipment functional. This improvisation reflected Marine resourcefulness under impossible conditions. Whether the airdrop confusion actually occurred or as embellishment, Tootsie rolls became symbol of Chosin. They represented how Marines survived using whatever resources available, how humor persisted even in frozen hell, how small things, candy, warmth, moment of levity, helped maintain morale when everything else was terrible. The Tootsie Roll Company, learning a role their product played at Chosin, sent letters of thanks to Marines, and later provided candy to Marine Corps for training and deployments. The connection between Tootsie Rolls and Chosin became part of Marine Corps lore, and is remembered at reunions and memorials. While Marines fought to survive and withdraw, Chinese 9th Army Group was being destroyed. General Song Shirluan's plan to encircle and annihilate 1st Marine Division had failed catastrophically. Instead of destroying Marines, the 9th Army Group exhausted itself in futile attacks. Chinese casualties were staggering. Exact figures are disputed and may never be known precisely, but estimates range from 40,000 to 60,000 casualties, including killed, wounded, and incapacitated by frostbite. Some Chinese units suffered 70% casualties. Entire divisions were combat ineffective by mid-December. The Chinese 20th Army, which attacked Yudam-ni, lost approximately 10,000 killed and even more wounded or frostbitten. The 27th Army, which attacked Hagaru-ri in the road, suffered similar casualties. The 26th Army, which attacked Hagaru-ri and lower reaches of road, was severely depleted. By December 13th, when Marines reached Hungnam, the Chinese 9th Army Group existed on paper but barely functioned as military force. The reasons for Chinese failure were multiple. The Marines defended more effectively than anticipated. American firepower, artillery, air support, automatic weapons inflicted casualties Chinese couldn't sustain. Marine cohesion and leadership prevented panic or collapse even when surrounded. The cold affected Chinese more severely than Marines due to inadequate clothing and equipment. Chinese logistics couldn't sustain prolonged battle. Ammunition and food ran out. Chinese medical support couldn't handle casualties. Wounded died from lack of treatment. Chinese after-action assessments were critical of Song Shirluan's leadership and tactical decisions. The decision to attack defended positions repeatedly despite heavy casualties was questioned. The failure to adapt tactics when initial attacks failed was criticized. The inadequate preparation for extreme cold was noted as systemic failure. The destruction of 9th Army Group had strategic implications. Chinese High Command had committed elite force to destroy 1st Marine Division and failed. The propaganda value of annihilating American unit wasn't achieved. The Marines escaped encirclement, inflicted far more casualties than they suffered, and remained combat effective force. The psychological impact on Chinese forces was significant. The Marines' reputation grew while Chinese confidence was shaken. The 9th Army Group never recovered as coherent fighting force. Units were reconstituted with replacements, but institutional knowledge was gone. Veterans who survived were scattered. The formation that entered Korea in November 1950 intending to destroy American divisions ceased to exist as effective military organization by January 1951. December 10th, division crossed Funchilin Pass using temporary bridge and descended toward coast. The Chinese resistance decreased noticeably. The 9th Army Group units that remained combat effective were withdrawing to regroup. Sporadic attacks continued but weren't pressed with previous determination. The Marines maintained defensive posture throughout descent. Rear guard units provided security while main body moved. Engineers cleared roadblocks and repaired damage. Artillery fired counter-battery missions against Chinese positions. Air support struck concentrations and supply lines. The withdrawal was controlled and methodical despite exhaustion and cold. December 11th, lead elements of 1st Marine Division reached Hungnam perimeter. The division had fought through 78 miles of Chinese-held territory in 17 days. They brought 4,500 casualties, most of equipment, and approximately 100,000 Korean refugees who fled communist forces. The accomplishment was extraordinary by any measure. A division surrounded and outnumbered 4-1 had fought through multiple Chinese divisions, inflicted tens of thousands of casualties, maintained cohesion and combat effectiveness, and withdrawn without leaving behind casualties or substantial equipment. The operation that Chinese intended as annihilation of Marine Division became one of the most successful fighting withdrawals in military history. At Hungnam, evacuation ships waited. The wounded were loaded first, then equipment, then remaining Marines. The 1st Marine Division boarded ships December 11th to 15th and sailed to Busan in southern South Korea. The division would refit, receive replacements, and return to combat. But Chosin was over. The 1st Marine Division suffered approximately 836 killed in action, 2,500 wounded, and over 200 missing at Chosin. Additionally, approximately 7,300 Marines and attached Army personnel suffered frostbite, requiring medical treatment. Total casualties exceeded 10,000, over one-third of division strength. The frostbite casualties reflected extreme cold's impact. Many Marines suffered permanent damage, amputated fingers or toes, chronic circulation problems, cold sensitivity for the rest of their lives. Some frostbite victims couldn't return to duty. Others recovered sufficiently to continue serving, but with reduced capabilities. Combat casualties included all categories: killed instantly, died of wounds, wounded requiring evacuation, wounded returning to duty after treatment. Medical personnel performed surgery in impossible conditions. treating casualties in tents with minimal heating, using frozen instruments, working with inadequate lighting. The wounded who survived often did so despite conditions rather than because of medical care. The psychological casualties couldn't be quantified immediately, but affected many survivors. Combat fatigue, what would later be recognized as PTSD, resulted from 17 days of continuous combat in extreme cold. Nightmares, anxiety, difficulty adjusting to normal conditions. These symptoms appeared in veterans months or years after Chosin. The suffering didn't end when battle ended. Chinese casualties, as noted, exceeded 40,000 by most estimates. Some sources suggest higher figures when including those who died later from wounds or frostbite. The Chinese Ninth Army Group entered Korea with approximately 120,000 troops. By late December, fewer than 60,000 remained combat effective. The cost of Chinese forces was catastrophic and disproportionate to any tactical gains achieved. Korean civilian casualties are unknown but substantial. Many Koreans, both north and south, lived in Chosin region. Fighting displaced thousands. Chinese requisitioned food and shelter from civilians. Some civilians froze or starved. Others were killed in crossfire or targeted as suspected collaborators. The Korean War's impact on civilian populations is often overlooked, but was devastating at Chosin as elsewhere. The evacuation at Hungnam was a massive amphibious operation in reverse. Instead of landing forces, Navy ships evacuated troops, equipment, supplies, and refugees. The operation began December 11th and continued through December 24th. Approximately 105,000 military personnel, Marines, Army Korean forces, were evacuated. Over 17,500 vehicles and 350,000 tons of supplies were loaded on ships. And critically, approximately 100,000 Korean refugees were evacuated. The refugees were civilians fleeing communist forces, fearing retribution for real or perceived collaboration with Americans or South Korean government. The decision to evacuate refugees was controversial. Military necessity argued for prioritizing troops and equipment, but humanitarian considerations and propaganda value argued for evacuating refugees who wanted to flee. General Almond and other commanders authorized refugee evacuation despite complications. The refugee evacuation became one of war's humanitarian successes. The SS merited victory. Merchant ship loaded approximately 14,000 refugees, far exceeding normal capacity, and sailed to Busan. Other ships took refugees as space allowed. The evacuated refugees settled in South Korea, many in Jeoj Island refugee camps. Their descendants remember Hungnam evacuation as salvation from communist rule. After personnel, equipment, and refugees were loaded, remaining supplies at Hungnam were destroyed. Ammunition dumps were detonated. Fuel dumps were burned. Anything useful to enemy was destroyed. The explosions at Hungnam on December 24th were visible for miles. The port facilities were rendered unusable. Nothing of value was left for Chinese or North Korean forces. The evacuation at Hungnam, like the fighting withdrawal from Chosin, demonstrated organizational capability and determination. The military evacuated over 200,000 people and 350,000 tons of material under combat conditions. The operation was completed without major losses. Ships left Hungnam fully loaded heading to South Korea, while Chinese forces watched from hills unable to prevent evacuation. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir was tactical defeat for United Nations forces. The offensive toward Yalu River failed. Territory captured in November was abandoned. The 1st Marine Division withdrew from furthest advance to coastal perimeter. By conventional measures, Chinese achieved their objective of stopping American advance. But strategically, Chosin was American victory. The Chinese Ninth Army Group was destroyed as combat effective force. Chinese suffered 40,000 plus casualties compared to approximately 1,000 Americans killed. The Marine Division survived encirclement and remained combat capable. Chinese failed to annihilate American unit despite overwhelming numbers. Chinese propaganda claiming great victory rang hollow given casualties suffered. The psychological impact favored Americans. Marines who survived Chosin knew they'd face worse conditions imaginable and prevailed. The reputation of 1st Marine Division grew. Chinese forces learned that American units were more resilient than anticipated, that encirclement didn't guarantee destruction, that numerical superiority wasn't sufficient against determined defenders with superior firepower. The strategic situation in Korea stabilized after Chosin. Chinese pushed UN forces back from Yalu, but couldn't drive them from Korea entirely. The front stabilized roughly along 38th parallel, where war had begun. Fighting continued until armistice in July 1953, but neither side achieved decisive victory. Chosin demonstrated that Korean War would be protracted stalemate rather than quick victory for either side. The relationship between General Oliver Smith and General Edward Almond remained contentious throughout battle and afterward. Almond criticized Smith for excessive caution, slow movement, unwillingness to take risks. Smith criticized Almond for ignoring intelligence warnings, pushing division into untenable position, failing to provide adequate support. The controversy reflected different command philosophies. Almond emphasized aggression and speed. He wanted rapid advance regardless of risks. He believed audacity and offensive spirit would overcome obstacles. This philosophy characterized his leadership throughout Korean War and had achieved success at Incheon Landing in September 1950. Smith emphasized preparation and caution. He wanted secure supply lines, adequate reserves, realistic objectives. He believed protecting his Marines was paramount responsibility. This philosophy made him a careful commander who wouldn't waste lives on futile operations. At Chosin, both philosophies were tested. Almond's aggression led to division being surrounded deep in mountains. Smith's caution ensured division had supplies and defensive positions to survive encirclement. Almond wanted faster withdrawals, sacrificing equipment. Smith insisted on bringing everyone and everything out. Almond criticized results. Smith delivered results. Post-battle assessments generally favored Smith. Military historians noted that Smith's decision saved division. His insistence on building Hagaru-ri Airstrip was prescient. His refusal to abandon casualties and equipment maintained division cohesion. His controlled withdrawal prevented disaster. Almond's reputation suffered from perception that he'd pushed division into trap and then blamed Smith for consequences. The Army and Marine Corps drew different lessons from Chosin. Army emphasized need for better cold weather training and equipment. Marines emphasized vindication of their doctrine and esprit de corps. Both services claimed Chosin validated their approaches, though casualties suffered by Army units attached to Marines suggested that Marine training and cohesion made difference in survival. Marines who fought at Chosin called themselves Chosin Few. The name reflected both pride in surviving and recognition that relatively small number of people experienced what they experienced. The Chosin Few formed tight-knit veterans organization that maintained connections for decades. The psychological impact of Chosin affected survivors for life. Many had nightmares about cold, about being surrounded, about seeing friends die. Some developed aversion to cold, moving to warm climates, avoiding winter activities. Others refused to discuss Chosin with families, unable to articulate what they'd experienced or unwilling to burden others with memories. Survivor guilt was common. Why did I survive when better Marines died? This question haunted veterans. Some felt they should have done more, fought harder, somehow prevented casualties. Rationally, they understood that survival in combat involved luck. Emotionally, the guilt remained. Frostbite casualties dealt with physical aftermath. Amputated fingers or toes created permanent disabilities. Chronic pain, circulation problems, cold sensitivity. These conditions affected daily life. Some veterans qualified for disability benefits. Others suffered without adequate support. The physical scars were daily reminders of Chosin. But many veterans also felt pride in what they accomplished. They'd faced impossible odds and prevailed. They'd been surrounded 4-1 and fought their way out. They'd endured minus 40 degrees and continued fighting. They brought everyone out, dead, wounded, equipment. This pride sustained veterans when memories were painful. Reunions of Chosin Few provided opportunity to connect with people who understood. Stories could be told that families didn't comprehend. Bonds formed in frozen mountains were renewed. For many veterans, reunions were therapeutic. Confirmation they weren't alone in memories and suffering. The organization raised funds for memorials, scholarships, and support for veterans and families. The Chosin Reservoir Battle is commemorated through multiple memorials. The most prominent is Chosin Few Memorial in San Diego, California, dedicated in 2001. The memorial includes statues of Marines in winter combat gear and plaques listing units that fought at Chosin. Annual ceremonies bring together veterans, families, and active duty Marines to honor those who fought. Individual memorials exist across the United States. Towns that lost Marines at Chosin erected monuments. Schools and buildings were named for Chosin veterans. The battle entered Marine Corps lore as a defining moment demonstrating determination and courage. The 13 Medal of Honor recipients are remembered through various means. Their citations are displayed at Marine Corps museums. Their stories are taught to new Marines as examples of heroism. The concentration of medals awarded for Chosin reflects extraordinary circumstances and exceptional valor. In North Korea, the battle is remembered differently. Chinese and North Korean histories emphasize resistance against American invasion. The casualties suffered are presented as heroic sacrifice for Korean independence. The destruction of 9th Army Group is downplayed. Memorials focus on Chinese volunteers' contribution to Korean War rather than specific battles. In South Korea, Chosin is remembered as part of larger Korean War narrative. South Korean forces fought alongside Marines, and South Korean civilians were affected by battle. The evacuation of Korean refugees from Hungnam is remembered as humanitarian success. Memorials in South Korea honor both military and civilian victims of war. Chosin Reservoir can be compared to other famous military withdrawals to understand its unique character. Dunkirk evacuation in May-June 1940 evacuated 338,000 Allied troops from France. But Dunkirk was evacuation from beaches with naval support relatively close. Chosin required fighting withdrawal through 78 miles of enemy territory in extreme cold before reaching evacuation point. The sustained combat intensity was far greater. Bataan Death March in April 1942 involved 76,000 American and Filipino troops surrendering to Japanese and being force-marched 65 miles with thousands dying. Bataan was surrender and captivity. Chosin was fighting withdrawal where surrounded force refused to surrender and fought their way out. The contrast demonstrates different outcomes from similar situations. German 6th Army at Stalingrad in 1942-43 was surrounded by Soviets. Unlike Marines at Chosin, 6th Army was ordered to hold position and was eventually destroyed with 90,000 surrendering. Chosin demonstrated that surrounded force with determined leadership and ability to move could escape even when outnumbered. British withdrawal from Burma in 1942 involved 900-mile retreat through jungle fighting Japanese. The Burma retreat was longer than Chosin, but wasn't conducted while surrounded. Chosin's encirclement made it more desperate, but also more focused. The unique aspect of Chosin were combination of encirclement, extreme cold, numerical inferiority, sustained combat, and successful withdrawal. Other battles had some elements, but not all. Chosin stands as exemplar how determination, leadership, and cohesion can prevail despite circumstances suggesting inevitable defeat. Chosin Reservoir became central to Marine Corps identity. The battle demonstrated values Marines emphasize: determination, courage, refusing to accept defeat, bringing everyone home. Chosin few became honor title within Corps. New Marines learn about Chosin during training. The battles are studied as examples of small unit leadership, defensive fighting, maintaining cohesion under pressure. The specific actions, Fox Company's stand, Davis's march to relieve them, Barber's leadership, the bridge at Funchilin Pass, are taught as lessons in courage and tactical skill. Retreat hell, we're just advancing in a different direction, became unofficial Marine motto. The quote, capture Marine attitude toward adversity, reframe problems as opportunities, refuse to accept defeat, maintain offensive mindset even when surrounded. Whether Smith actually said those exact words or they were embellished doesn't matter. The sentiment was accurate. The emphasis on bringing everyone out, casualties, equipment, refugees, reflected Marine Corps values. No one left behind wasn't just slogan. At Chosin, it was operational requirement despite complications. Marines carried wounded comrades through frozen mountain for days. They transported dead rather than burying them in Korea. They brought out equipment despite weight. This determination demonstrated commitment to fellow Marines that defined Corps culture. Chosin also reinforced Marine Corps' sense of institutional excellence. Marines argued that their training, discipline, and cohesion made difference between survival and destruction. Army units that fought alongside Marines at Chosin suffered higher casualty rates and needed Marine support. This comparison, whether entirely fair or not, validated Marine beliefs about superiority of their training and culture. The Chosin few remain honored within Marine Corps. Veterans are recognized at ceremonies. Their stories are preserved in oral histories and museums. Active duty Marines understand that living up to Chosin's legacy means maintaining same determination and courage that sustained Marines in frozen hell. Chinese never expected 30,000 Marines surrounded at minus 40 degrees because they assumed overwhelming numerical superiority, and extreme cold would guarantee American collapse. The 9th Army Group had 120,000 troops versus 30,000 Marines. The temperature reached minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The Marines were isolated 78 miles inland. Every advantage favored Chinese. But Chinese miscalculated American resilience, leadership, firepower, and determination. The Marines defended positions despite being outnumbered 4-1. They maintained cohesion despite extreme cold. They fought continuously for 17 days while withdrawing 78 miles. They brought out 4,500 casualties, virtually all equipment, and 100,000 Korean refugees. They inflicted 40,000 to 60,000 Chinese casualties while suffering 1,000 killed. The result was tactical defeat, reframed as strategic victory. The offensive toward Yalu failed. Territory was abandoned, but the 1st Marine Division survived and remained combat effective. The Chinese 9th Army Group was destroyed. American prestige grew while Chinese confidence was shaken. The encirclement that should have resulted in annihilation became legendary fighting withdrawal. From November 27 to December 13, 1950, from Yudam-ni to Hagaru-ri to Funchilin Pass to Hungnam, from -40-degree cold to human wave attacks to 13 Medals of Honor, the Battle of Chosin Reservoir demonstrated that courage and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. 30,000 Marines surrounded by 120,000 Chinese. 17 days continuous combat. 78 miles fighting withdrawal. -40 degrees Fahrenheit. 13 Medals of Honor. The battle where retreat hell became attacking in different direction. The campaign where frozen weapons and frozen casualties couldn't break frozen determination. The 17 days that destroyed Chinese 9th Army Group, while surrounded Marines fought their way to coast, bringing everyone out. The frozen triumph, where Chinese never expected Marines to survive encirclement at -40 degrees, where 30,000 surrounded troops refused to surrender and fought through 4-1 odds, where extreme cold tested human limits and Marines proved those limits could be exceeded through courage and determination.